Dick Gregory, talking to you about the front page. Every morning, radio station KJLH 102.3. You have to be part of it. Information is knowledge. Hey, for you.
And the knowledge this morning is coming to you from 102.3 KJLH. The front page, your early morning communications drum for all of Southern California, is now wide open. I'm Carl Nelson, and joining us from Washington, D.C., activist, the Boule Buster, Steve Coakley. Number to call, speak to Steve, 520-KJLH. As always, the comments expressed on the front page are not necessarily those of our advertisers or the management and staff of KJLH. Before we get to Steve Coakley and your phone calls, though, first the headlines on this 4th day of July, 1996. Nation of Islam Minister Louis Farrakhan is in Philadelphia, where he will lead a rally on behalf of imprisoned journalist Mumia Abu Jamal. Farrakhan's rally will occur at the same time the city is celebrating its Independence Day festivities near the Liberty Bell. Rodney King's attorney, Edie Fall, says if it weren't for King's notoriety, he wouldn't be on trial for corporal injury to his estranged wife. King allegedly struck his wife and pushed her out of a vehicle when they got into an argument about a map while driving in Alhambra in 1995. Boris Yeltsin says it's time to rebuild Russia one day after winning that country's presidential election in a runoff. President Clinton is in Youngstown, Ohio for that city's Independence Day celebrations. Many cities have banned the use of fireworks. County officials suggest if you want to watch a display, do so in an official show like the Hollywood Bowl, Rose Bowl, or Dodger Stadium. And the top African American entertainers and lecturers are in New Orleans for the annual Essence magazine get-together. 520-KJLH gets you on this morning. Good morning, Steve. Steve Coakley.
Yay, what's up?
Good morning.
I was just getting ready, and I heard you mention the program in New Orleans, and that's the program Essence of Susan Taylor, I believe. Is that what you were saying?
Right.
And I am very pleased with the sister. I know during the time that we were having a conflict with Time Warner, which was, at that time, we thought their primary concern was to stop me from speaking to the blacks in the music industry at a forum of theirs held in February. And, of course, I was on with brother community attorney Alden Maddox opposing Time Warner and some of the things they were doing. During that time, Time Warner had selected Susan Taylor to replace me as a speaker for the Our Roots Run Deep lecture series, which was a month-long program being put on by the employees of Time Warner and other labels in the music industry. And she, in fact, called me up at home and told me that she would not come and be a part of any program that didn't allow me to have an opportunity to speak. She admitted that she had never heard my information and did not know what exactly it was that was frightening the corporate interest so strongly. She said, you must be really up to something because they are really worried. But she says, I will not replace you, and I stand with you. And she then explained to me that at that time she was having a hard time with setting up her program in New Orleans this year because the governor of Louisiana had rescinded affirmative action legislation, and many of the blacks who were going to hold conventions in New Orleans and programs like hers had met privately, and there was vacillation about pulling out. So she immediately announced that she was pulling out, and then I believe she was joined by Hugh Price of the Urban League, and I believe the Urban League also was coming to New Orleans, and they were pulling out. And in fact, the only group that would not stand in pulling out of Louisiana was the Lynx. And interestingly enough, she said, I hear you know something about these Greek societies. Are those Lynx, are they connected to this thing? And she said, because I surely could use some help against them because they're trying to block us from pulling out of New Orleans. And eventually, the governor did come out and reaffirm through some form of executive order of some sort that he pledged to uphold what we always know is the symbolic sensitivity to black businesses. And that then allowed all of the various conveners to go forth and to bring the programs onto New Orleans. So I know that though I've seen, in fact, one article I think Essence published was about the return of the Mau Mauers. And in that article, it was very negative towards people who are against the system and against conspiracy. But at least I know in the sister's heart that she's a liberator. And I really appreciated the support that she had given us in New York. So I know that you can look at some of the people that have been assembled for that particular program, and you can see what kind of person can gravitate that diverse set of people. And it's not just that they're having music, but they're also having conferences and workshops and other things. And
right.
That's a very fascinating mix. And, of course, if anyone was just to be in and around there, they might be able to do and advance other issues that are not necessarily on the agenda, but due to the great diversity of the audience. So I'm pleased, and on this Liberation Day, which the whites symbolize, we should take it in reverse and give thanks that we are in position to break the dependence that we share with whites these days, and that this dependence has had us become victimized by slowdowns in budgets, reduced health services, the suffocation of education. We are being impacted by the worth of others, and on this Dependence Day, we should know that it is to break the chain of dependence for education, for food, for psychological justification of what is right. We think consciously of this day. And I also had mentioned to you earlier that I had wanted to say a little something about Martin King today. As I have read and studied even deeper, I tried to figure out how certain things got in place. I was reading Reverend Sharpton's book. He has a book out now called Go Tell Pharaoh. And it's a very interesting book. And in his book, I found Reverend Sharpton had become, in New York, the youth director of Operation Breadbasket. And I'm from Chicago. I was very familiar with Operation Breadbasket, which is the younger days of Jesse Jackson's involvement in the black community in Chicago. And my mother, myself, and others spent many Saturday mornings in the Operation Breadbasket Saturday meetings, walked the picket lines on Red Rooster and High Low and the various stores that were being targeted. And he made a comment in his book that I was intrigued by, and the comment stated that Jesse Jackson, who he had admired as a young preacher. His heroes were Adam Clayton Powell and another pastor there in New York, shepherded him through the community. And he was very proud of his relationship with Jesse Jackson. And in closing a chapter about his relationship with Jesse, he states that Abernathy was jealous of Jesse's star power, and that Abernathy suspended Jesse Jackson from Operation Breadbasket unfairly, and that God has shown that Abernathy and none of the others have withstood the test of time. God has shown that Jesse Jackson was the leader. And I was intrigued by that statement. In fact, I was a little pissed at the attitude, being in Chicago and knowing much about Jesse, probably more than most from outside the country. In fact, this is what Sharpton says. 25 years later, Jesse Jackson is the only one of those men still on the stage, so I guess it was the right move. He went on to bigger and better things. Jesse took a lot from these people. He's talking about the SCLC people. They were trying to break him. Abernathy was jealous of Jesse's star power and didn't want him around. They suspended him from SCLC for no reason. They worked at openly humiliating him.
Now, this was when Dr. King had died, or when Dr. King was still living? Dr.
King is dead now, and now Jesse Jackson is in Chicago holding Push Expo. This is the beginning of the Black Expos, a remnant of what we see rotating around, though it's not the same people.
Right.
These large coming together of corporate interests in a black cultural theme to relay sensitivity to each other's consumer power. And it says they worked openly at humiliating him. There's a lot of human drama that goes on behind closed doors in the ministry. And then he talks about ego and other things that were there. He said Abernathy was only there because he was Martin's friend. He never caught on with black people. Abernathy was well regarded by fellow clergymen. He could lead ministers, but the vast majority of the ordinary black Americans never saw him as their leader. History has proven how they saw Jesse. And I thought about that line, so immediately I went to my little research library and I pulled up some books. I wanted to go back to that time and period when Jesse was one of the soldiers of Martin King, and there I find Jesse Jackson, James Bevel, Al Sampson, of course Andy Young, Hosea Williams, And it was quite intriguing to get this reflection. I went back to what was Martin King doing in this last year, April of 80, April of 68. In December of 67, let's go back a little bit. Let me tell you a little story that would be worth everybody checking on. In December of 67, Martin King recognized that SCLC really was losing its hold in the black community, and it appears as if the nonviolent focus was being attested as ineffective. In 66 in Chicago with Mayor Daley, when he came in there to march for open housing, and Daley signed this symbolic covenant and chased him out of town when they hit Martin King in the head with the bricks in Cicero and Marquette Park, Martin had felt that SCLC really jeopardized its vitality by looking ineffective in Chicago. They were good in the South. The things they were doing were working, but as they came north, this white in the North was far more trickier, and they were not being as effective with the brand of demonstrations they brought from the South. So Martin started increasing his attack on the military-industrial complex. He increased his international perspective about the relationship of the war, America, and Africans' relation in it, and began to move towards another segment of started to evolve into another level of attacking the establishment, even though he's still even establishment related with grants and Peace Prize and every other thing. In December of 67, Martin announces that he wants to come back to Washington for a peace for the the Poor People's Campaign. He wanted to bring poor people to Washington so that while they're spending the money on the war, he wants the people to see what poverty looks like in America. This is right in the era of the coming forth of the poverty programs as well. So Martin, in December of 67, makes this announcement, but there's disruption amongst the staff, many of which who are telling him that we should not go to Washington in December, striking in the summer of 68. We should stay away from there. We cannot control our people. What if the government doesn't answer to our demands and we look like a fool? What will it do for our image? And so in the months of January and February and March, now the protests in Memphis goes down in March. The first march is in March. Of course, Martin is killed April 4th in Memphis. In February and in March, as Martin begins to set up the plans to pick the people in the various cities who will be responsible for bringing their poor people on into Washington. Now, remember, they had already had the success of the March on Washington in 63, and even though we know its artificial nature and the role of the unions and the propping up of much of that, we still recognize in that moment in history that was a monumental thing. And of course, Martin then is a threat for the ability to focal head those people, not necessarily control them. So now, in the meetings, you pick up Abernathy's book. You pick up the House assassination report on the Martin King assassination in 79. You pick up what's this other book I'm reading? The Man, the Myth, and the Movement by Barbara Reynolds. And you look at these chapters about the last days of Martin King, and you denote this, that 3 people were harassing Martin unusually strong against going to Washington. They were Jesse Jackson, James Bevel, and Andy Young. And Martin was so mad during this period at Jesse Jackson, Chauncey Eskridge, who was the attorney for Martin King. I know Chauncey Eskridge. He's from Chicago. He was the attorney for Muhammad Ali for many years, very prominent black attorney, and worked with Elijah Muhammad as well. Chauncey Eskridge was there, and they had this meeting March 30th in Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. Prior to that, this little demonstration in Memphis got out of control. Some of the gangsters, the invaders, had started breaking windows. Whitney Young came out and repudiated Martin King, saying, don't you ever come to Washington. You can't control your demonstrations. Roy Wilkins came out against Martin King. You can't come to Washington. You're out of control. These are putting big pressure on him, pressure to stay out of the war. But then he's getting pressure from the inside, and it's the inside pressure that was unusual that made Martin feel that they were closing in on him. And as he then has this last big meeting at Ebenezer Baptist Church up in the library, March 30th, This is 5 days before he's killed. He has this meeting, and Jesse Jackson gets up again and starts this tirade of belittling Martin about why it is they cannot go to Washington. This is an unusual characteristic. Jesse, the junior member of the staff, is raising the biggest hell, but it's irritating Martin to the point that he refuses to conflict with Jesse, turns to Abernathy, says, "Give me the keys, I'm leaving," goes to the stairs, goes down the stairway. Abernathy runs to the stairway and says, Martin. Martin says, I gotta go. Jesse goes to the top of the stairway. Martin, come back here. Martin says, look, Jesse Jackson. And this phrase is a historic phrase for those who go back and check. You want to make a name for yourself. You will not use this organization, and leave me alone. And Martin runs out the door.
Wow.
And everybody denotes that is the maddest they've ever seen Martin King at anyone in their life.
Well, what was Jesse Jackson's thing about going to Washington?
That's intriguing. This is why I brought these things up, because what Sharpton denotes in the book is that somehow Abernathy is jealous of Jesse. But as I look back into really what was going on, Abernathy was a subservient to the needs and wants of Martin King. He had no push or authority. It was Martin who was uncomfortable about Jesse. When I think about Abernathy's book, which is very, very good, the book was belittled because of 3 pages in the book that mention Martin's sexual encounters with other women. And Jesse and others went out on the point and killed literally Abernathy's book from historical review. And the essence of the book ain't about sex. The essence of the book is about character of men involved in the movement against great pressure and what some of the pressures on those men were. And what you see clearly is pressure from Jesse Jackson and James Bevel.
But was it accurate?
The House Assassination Committee report denotes it. 6 other books that I've reviewed denote the same moments. A personal testimony from Chauncey Eskridge stating that's the maddest I've ever seen Martin in my life. A testimony from Ralph Abernathy, that's the maddest I've ever seen Martin in my life. In fact, if you carry that forth to Martin getting shot on the balcony, remember, Jesse Jackson wants to go to dinner with Martin King at Reverend Kyle's church, Reverend Kyle's house, who is where they're going for dinner that night. Martin and Abernathy in the room getting ready. Martin comes to the balcony, leans over and says to Jesse, you can come to dinner with me tonight. Why was that important? It was important because of the tension between Jesse and Martin, such that Jesse was not wanted in the inner circle of Martin because of his irritation, but Martin in the spirit of brotherhood. And everybody makes note of this in their various reflections of this, that in the spirit he reached out to Jesse. And then it says that Jesse had already made arrangements to be at that dinner at Reverend Kyle's house without Martin's approval, because he wasn't going to be out of anything that went on in those last moments.
Wow.
And then there's the other part. The part 2 to it is that then 104 articles come out in the major media, Playboy, Time, Newsweek, stating 2 things: that Martin King's last conversation was with Jesse Jackson, which it was not. It was with Solomon Jones, the driver, the limousine driver, whose family owned the funeral home that did the body and sent it on to Atlanta. And 2 was that Jesse Jackson was the heir apparent to Martin King. In Barbara Reynolds' book, The Man, the Myth, and the Movement, she talks with a guru, a white press guru in Chicago named Don Rose. He's a fixed man, formerly involved in military intelligence. His father was in military intelligence. He's a behind-the-scenes liberal guru in Chicago, always leaned in and around black things, always running the psychological operation in impressing the media. He'd line them up and get the themes he wanted out in the public. He did it even for Harold Washington. He admits a private meeting when Jesse flew back to Chicago. He admits in his book, and I'll later on can tell you the exact passage, what he says precisely in a quote. he admits to having a meeting with Jesse after he flew back to Chicago. And at that meeting, they decided that they would make a conscious effort to associate Jesse Jackson as the heir apparent to Martin King. And that was a conscious thing, and they then went to the Today Show. They then went to the various media outlets and promoted Jesse. He said, we promoted him like we would any other product.
Wow. You know, some of that was on, I think it was on PBS, I guess a show talking about Jesse and the life of Jesse. It came out in conjunction with the book. Are you familiar with the book by Jesse?
I remember the PBS program because they put it on the front page here of the local. I didn't see the program, and I guess I now need to get a review of it, and I'm sure someone out there make it available for me. I'm going to be in L.A. Next Friday for a lecture Saturday, Sunday, and Wednesday. Next Saturday, the 13th, next Sunday, the 14th, and Wednesday, the 17th, I'll be there lecturing for the Amen-Ra Church at 2700 East 54th, West 2700 West 54th Street, and I'll tell you more about that later. And you know, I'm just thinking about I'm on 4th of They Lion, and I know them people sleep out there today. I look out this parking lot, and I see all of the cars in the building that I live in here, right outside of D.C. So the word will really have to pass because I know of all of the days them Africans has been worked hard by the whites this week, and they're probably sleep. But I really want to tell them that I've looked up some very powerful information in the vein of this and some deeper things that they really wouldn't want to miss. I've worked hard since I saw them last gathering some very interesting information, including this.
What time is the lecture?
The lecture, the one on Saturday is going to be at 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock on Saturday. This is the new location of the Amen-Ra Church there, with headed by our father in Christ, Brother Onion Palmer, who I have to tell you, this brother is really an outstanding man. Not only on my last trip did I go around the school and get those demonstrations from those children, but as a brother, some of the things he says to me and some of the concerns he voices as a brother, I'm very honored just to know him. He's you look at him, he doesn't look like the genius that he is. People very much underrate the power of this man and his relationship with those children and his brotherhood. I have been most impressed about what he has done to try to give me an opportunity to share my information with Los Angeles, not only on this occasion, but in the past. And there's much more we'll hear from this brother on other levels, I'm sure, in the future, because he's thinking through some things that are truly awesome, and I'm proud to be in his thoughts. 2700 West 54th Street, Saturday at 5 o'clock, and this will be a straight 2-hour lecture. Then we'll come back Sunday at 1 p.m., and then we'll come back Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Now, Wednesday at 7 o'clock, I'm going to do a special lecture for Onion Palmer. It's about education. It's about whites' impact in education suffocation. That's a lecture I'm going to dedicate to him, and I'm going to indict those whites that have made his school just a building instead of all the buildings. And I told him that after the revolution, he was definitely going to be Secretary of Education, because truly, if he had the opportunity on a mass scale to do what people failed to do, the privilege to teach, it would be an honor to have a revolution just to give him that level of opportunity. So it's Saturday at 5, Sunday at 1, and Wednesday at 7. And I know there are a lot of things going on in L.A. next week. I'm going to come out to your program and support you all on your forum. I'd love to be able to assist. I know you got Jawanza Kunjufu as one of your speakers. That's my old neighborhood brother. We were raised on the same block together.
Well, come on out. The invitation stands. You're there. We want you there.
I appreciate that.
Okay. 2 minutes away from 5 o'clock, 520 KJLH. Steve Coakley, our guest this morning on the front page. We'll take your phone calls for Steve right after this.
KJLH, Compton, Los Angeles.
5 o'clock straight up, the front page is on the air. Steve Coakley's our guest this morning. 520 KJLH is the number to call to speak to Steve. I know Sarai in the Valley's been holding for a while. Good morning, you're on the air.
What's up, Brother Steve? What's up, Brother Carl?
Hey, what's up, Brother Simone?
What's up, brother? Yeah, seems like our destinies kind of linked here, because every time I pick up turn on the radio at 4:30 in the morning, you seem to be on there. anyway, there was a couple things I wanted to bring forth and get your commentary on.
You say Jesse be on a lot?
What's that now?
Is that what you said?
What?
Did you just say Jesse's on a lot?
Oh, no. I just wanted to bring forth a couple things and get your commentary on them. You know, and as I go through some of my studies and looking at the teachings of our ancestors and looking back at the history and looking at the whites you pointed out to us who are in control, it seems.
Hold on, Simone.
Yeah.
I need Jamal. So you're coming through on the radio. Something's coming in the background. Somebody's conversation is coming on, and I don't want them to say the wrong thing and not know that they can be heard. At least I can hear it.
Okay, go ahead. I think we can fix that.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. As I've been studying and looking at the whites who are in control back throughout the history, and then looking at the studies of the ancient ancestors, you know, particularly as it relates to spiritual matters, I'm finding that many of those, including, for example, Adolf Hitler, Adam Weishaupt, and on down to those who have those connections with those secret societies who you've been pointing out, have been studying the teachings of the ancient Egyptians or brothers from Kemet. And I would draw an analogy between that and Star Wars in that you saw Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader, you know, the dark side against the good side. And they were both operating on the Force, you know, deep knowledge. And however, Darth Vader was on the dark side. And I would liken the dark side to those whites who are studying the information and using those things for evil and perverting the symbols that we're trying to decode as well. So I just wanted to bring that forth. Secondly, I wanted to get your commentary on the recent church fires and bombing.
Okay. Well, the best I can. One is, yes, I'm intrigued about the symbolism that you were relaying, of course, in the entertainment industry. And I do need this. I missed yesterday's L.A. Times, which I guess it was not yesterday's. It might have been Tuesday's L.A. Times that had the story in it about the entertainment elite going away to the resort in Idaho for the meeting, and even it included Robert Johnson of BET. I hope someone out there can save that for me.
Right, Jamal's got a copy of it. Right
okay,
here.
if you could please have one around for me, I'd really appreciate it. Of course, Spielberg and Lucas and those types are represented at that type of meeting. It's that type of getaway where this new elite comes together to reformulate the type of perceptions they want to penetrate the society. One of the lectures I'll be giving out there is about the intelligence community and the media. And one of the things that is clear is that the intelligence community could not work. You can't do Mission Impossible on the people until you first show Mission Impossible on the people. If you show Mission Impossible on the people, it will provide the cover to do Mission Impossible on the people. So we understand that somewhere there's a collaborative moment between the authorities and the supporters of authority who all benefit and profit due to this containment and suffocation of the people. So that imagery is intense. And of course, the Spielberg and the crew are coming forward with the new Star Wars trilogy. And I forget what the title is, but it's leading to a new world order, a new government, or something. Something sounds very Rockefellerish. We'll look forward to that imagery. And of course, we know much of the society has gone off into Independence Day. I haven't seen the movie. I'm sure there's some parallels in there our people need to relate to us. They got the whites and the brother attacking the mother plane, and maybe that's part of, we've talked in the past about whites setting black men up to support them in their dilemmas with other whites. And so now we got Will Smith on the front page of Newsweek beaming up, fighting the mothership. And it may be that the mothership that threatens the whites may be support for the Africans and the other people of color. So we have to distort and separate. This is on Breaking Dependence Day. We want to separate our destiny from theirs. This is what brother is speaking about, these evil people looking back to the source of Kemet for inspiration and power. We must separate our destinies. They have latched on and subjugated us in a way that if they fart, we have a hurricane, and we have to break that level of dependence. And psychologically is set up in those ways. The church bombings, domestic terrorism. It is obvious that the society was prepared to use an issue to impress race upon a community. Now, any political scientist, if we walk to political scientists, they would tell us this. Every 4 years, the Republican Party is a master at making race the predominant focus and issue to get a Republican president elected. Because with the majority of the people being Democrats, this is how you get the white Democrat to go with the white Republican the white way. You bring race up. I want you to go back and look every 4 years. I was a product of the buildup in 88. Farrakhan was the product of the buildup in 84 and 88. Willie Horton was the buildup in 92. I want you to go back and look every 4 years. The Republican Party is a master. Now, they wanted to make the affirmative action case in California the predominant issue, but Wilson fell, the issue fell, and California fell off as a leg of importance. The fight will be much closer here on the East Coast to impress the people, to get them into the cattle charge of who they're going to go for, Clinton, or they're going to go for Dole. And the reality is it's all the same, but the church bombings fit into the edge. Now, I'm watching this guy. I just watched the tape of this FBI guy who's running around. And I say FBI guy because he still looks like an FBI guy, who's got this book out, Tyrone Powers. And I even got to go check and see what movies Tyrone Powers did, because that might be his code name. And I watched him. He's now out across America. And what is he mostly speaking on? The church bombings. He's out rationalizing, not necessarily rationalizing on behalf of the government, but pointing out certain insights about how the government should be acting and reacting in the church bombings. Now, one thing he denoted that was interesting, and we should make a note of this, that Clinton did not authorize the FBI to be the predominant lead agency in investigating the church bombings. Though the church bombings qualify as domestic terrorism, the FBI should have been the predominant investigative agency, but in fact he assigned the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Good Old Boys. Now, you church burned down, you're supposed to call 1-800-GOOD-OLD-BOY. You want to check the people's ability to take the woof, the good old boy woof. People weren't even suspended for a day's pay who hung out in the good old boy and hung eulogies of black people and burned them at the stake and had NIGGAR all over everything, whipping it with whips and cattle prods. And they could go from there and go to work and then get assigned to deal with a church fire. Now you got these churches supposedly being burned. I remember the church that was burned, and this is interesting. This was on the anniversary of the so-called assassination of Denise Brown. They had a church burned in North Carolina. But when they get to the bottom of this church burning, they find pentagrams on the wall and find out that it's a 14-year-old white girl who was a part of a satanic cult. Now, they got this thing going about it could be the Klan, it could be this, it could be that. It's probably all of those. They're all in on the diverting the people's attention away from what's going on. Now, while they're watching church burners, I'm watching the G7. What did the G7 just do? They gave the authority for the police in the United States to have police power in every city in the world. They have the right to go chase a criminal down and arrest them in Nairobi, Kenya, if they chose to, because they just claim police jurisdiction over everything. It's something you always never wanted, but just got put in that didn't even get ratified by a government that is of no intention and importance to any of the victims, but something just happened. But the church bombings, Now, the church bombings have drawn attention to the civil rights aristocracy. C.T. Vivian has come out. We see Morris D's there, the civil rights thing. We see Jesse Jackson, and we see all the old sluggers come on out. And I know that every year before we get to what we call people-intensive periods, where we're vulnerable to rebellion, July, August, 80, 90, 100-degree weather, predominantly on the East Coast, when you get to these high vulnerability areas, you have to build up and put people in the position to be useful, to have respect and authority. Now, what they've done by building up the church, now, I don't know what's been going on in them churches. It really must have been heavy to get all this support that they've been getting. I'm proud that someone finds them so necessary. And I just hope when education come up, independent education, they be in the forefront of it like we are in the forefront of church burnings. And I'm intrigued by this domestic terrorism. I'm intrigued by what went on in Phoenix, Arizona with these white men who were just arrested. I'm intrigued by, last time I was in L.A., the FBI put out an alert for 1,200 Jewish people who were supposedly under the threat of assassination. It appeared in L.A. Times in 2 paragraphs that they had went out and warned 1,200 people. You got the Olympics coming up in Atlanta. You got the Democratic Convention coming up in Chicago. You got the Republican Convention coming up in San Diego. I'm telling you, this is going to be one of the hairiest, woolliest, tensest periods in the history of this country.
All right, 12 minutes after 5 o'clock. You're just joining us on July 4th. Steve Coakley, our guest of this morning. 520-KJLH, the number to call to speak to Steve. Leroy, good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning, Carl. How you doing?
Great.
Mr. Coakley.
Yes, sir.
You hit on something that I had said about 2 years ago, right after the riots in L.A., and Carl, good buddy Rico, kind of cut me off the air when I said something bad about Jesse Jackson. But, see, I know Jesse Jackson from the killing of Martin Luther King. And I also know him. Here's something. I don't know if you know this or not, but about 2 or 3 days before King got killed, I was at Maxine Smith's house. You know who Maxine Smith is?
Mm-hmm.
She used to be the secretary of the NAACP.
Right.
I was at her house. Jesse Jackson was there, Martin Luther King was there, another Ralph Abernathy was there, and the other guy that hung with Ralph Abernathy, I can't think of his name right now.
Hosea Williams.
All were there. And Jesse Jackson made a statement about he wanted to become the head of the NAACP. And everybody looked around at him in shock. And as you remember, after King got killed, he tried to go for the head of the NAACP.
Now, why were they shocked? Because he was the low man on the totem pole, or the young kid in
well,
there?
He hadn't proved himself.
Okay.
How would you want to be the head of something you ain't proved your loyalty yet?
Right. In fact, at one point when Jesse's arguing with Martin King and he's impressing upon Martin the image, what would happen if we didn't succeed? And we have to think about our we need to make money. And he kept him. And then Abernathy says, and I look at this young man who obviously, when Martin tries to tell him about the poverty that we saw in Mississippi and how this is a burning desire for him to alleviate that, this young man, this upstart, this new into the movement man is concerned about his image. And it's obvious, it's Abernathy's dialogue, it's obvious that Martin's burning desire to help the people is not in James Bevel and is not in Jesse Jackson, for they're only concerned about how they look to the people.
Yeah. Also, he since they in the NAACP in Memphis totally was pissed at Jesse Jackson after King's death, because his actions. Everybody was watching his actions. And he wasn't acting like everybody else, sad and all that there. He had a little act going on, but when you caught him away from the mainstream of people there, hey, he wasn't in no sadness or nothing. My thing is, I've always said this about this man, that he does not represent me, period. Later.
All right.
Now, one other thing I want to add is that in Barbara Reynolds' book, The Man, the Myth, and the Movement, she has this portion where she has this picture there with Jesse Jackson in the City Council of Chicago, standing with Mayor Daley sitting next to him at the rostrum there. And he stands and makes this discussion about he having the blood of Martin King on his chest and that he cradled Martin King while he laid there on the balcony. Well, Abernathy says it very clearly. House Assassination Report repeats it, that the only man to touch Martin King after he was shot was Ralph Abernathy, who held Martin in his lap, his head, holding his head together as his face had been shattered by the bullet. And Abernathy has, in the sidebar, he has an interesting discussion in there about the autopsy and how gruesome it was to see how white folks did Martin King's body after he was dead, sawed his skull open, and just he said, I saw Martin's final dehumanization as he laid on the slab in the morgue, and they cut him up like a log of wood to say, look at the great Martin King. And he just really gripping. But the question is that Jesse says he held him and that he had the blood on his shirt. So now he goes to Today Show. He flies Chicago, goes on the Today Show. This is when Don Rose said they had this meeting. They go to Today Show. He takes him to the NBC studios in Chicago. And there Jesse starts this myth about his last moments with Martin. Now, not only was that not true, but in spirit, he was Martin's deepest antagonist. In spirit, he was as far away from Martin. You remember that famous speech that Martin gave? I may not get there with you, but I've seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Right. That's the speech he gave in Memphis before he died. Well, that night, Martin chose not to speak. He goes to the auditorium. He says, Ralph, you speak for me. He said, we need Jesse, because if you aren't there and the people ain't there, only Jesse can juice the people up like we need. He said, you can take Jesse, but only you will speak for me. They go to the auditorium. The place is packed. Abernathy goes to get a telephone to call Martin. Jesse says, don't call him. I'll give the speech. We don't need him. Abernathy says, I looked at Jesse's face and turned to the building maintenance man and says, you better give me a phone quick. Calls Martin. Martin decides to come. Martin comes and gives the speech of his life, or the speech of his death, as they say. But now, Jesse goes to Chicago, says he got the blood of Martin on his shirt. Now, Barbara Reynolds, who works for USA Today as a columnist, asked 10 people, what about this thing about Jesse and the shirt? Now, all of those who were in remorse from the death all felt not into what actually happened. Nobody was concerned about where they stood. Nobody was concerned about what they saw. They weren't even that much concerned about the killers. They were just so devastated personally. But Jesse's making moves, and it took them years to respond to what he said. In other words, they were so grief-stricken and paid so little attention to what went on around them that they didn't see the moves he was making and the things that he said. And then everyone repeated those false things that he said, 104 media items. And so it takes them years to really come forth and respond. And they asked Ben Branch, who was the guy who plays the saxophone. I know him. He's from Chicago. He's deceased now. But he's who Martin King leaned over the balcony and asked to play, will you play Precious Lord for me tonight? And Ben says, I will. It was Ben Branch. They said, Ben, what about this Jesse thing and the blood? He says, well, Jesse walked up on the balcony after they took Martin's body away and rubbed his shirt in the puddle of blood. He said, now, as far as what he said and what he did, he said, I think that speaks for itself.
Wow. 19 minutes after 5 o'clock, you just joined us. Steve Coakley's on the front page this morning. I want to remind you that tickets are available for the KJLH Town Hall meeting. Tickets are now available. Empowerment 96, it's called, Saturday, July the 13th, 10 o'clock at the Vision Complex. That's Marla's Place. You can get your tickets at SO1 Books in Inglewood and Altadena. Also, the Education 2000 Plus bookstore in Long Beach. Now, the event is sponsored by SO1 Books, Sumitomo Bank, and Education 2000 Plus bookstore. A portion of these proceeds will be donated to the Church Restoration Fund. You can hear people like Dr. Juwanza Kunjufu, Cheryl Broussard, and Kelvin Boston are our featured speakers. Steve Coakley is going to be there as well. 520 KJLH gets you on at 20 minutes after 5 o'clock. Let's keep rolling. Elaine, good morning. You're on the front page.
Good morning, Carl. This is Elaine, and good morning also to Steve. Steve, just a moment ago, I just had a startling thought. I did not hear what you said. Did you say that Jesse had rubbed his shirt in Martin Luther King's blood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the reason why I didn't hear that part is because ever since Martin Luther King has been shot, something has been bothering me. I swear to God, I was living in Illinois at the time, and I heard on the radio, it was downstate Illinois, that Martin Luther King had been shot, but it was a week before it happened. And I asked this is the God's truth. Maybe within hours, had they heard anything about it? They said no. So I just forgot about it. I was young and very naive back then. I forgot about it until just now. Except when I did hear that he actually did get shot, I thought it was strange that I heard that a week ago. And
now,
that is the God's truth.
And interestingly enough, remember a week earlier, as Martin had been in Memphis, he was in the same location. A week earlier, the white media forced him up out of the white Holiday Inn, I believe it was, and forced him over to the Lorraine Motel, stating that why it wasn't Martin King good enough to stay in a black motel. And so they forced him out of, I guess it would have happened the week earlier had he not checked in at the Holiday Inn. And he only checked in there because, interestingly enough, when the rebellion broke out at the little demonstration in Memphis, and then, you know, you being in southern Illinois, you're not far from Memphis because that water runs right up there to Cairo and all that southern Illinois area.
Right.
And that was a hotbed of activity during that period as well, with Reverend Charles Cohen and others down in that area. So you had him there a week earlier. The demonstration breaks out, and the shooting starts, and they break windows, and one of the little gang leaders gets killed. And so Martin jumps into a car. They ended up jumping in a lady's car they didn't know, and had her drive them to the edge of the police barricade. And then under police detail, they then drove him to the closest hotel, which was this particular Holiday Inn. And in fact, he made a note about them being the first blacks, or some of the first blacks to ever stay in this hotel. And they were only there because the demonstration had forced them out that area of Memphis, and that's he ended up there instead of Lorraine, but the whites chased him right on out of there.
Yeah, I remember you commenting about that once before. But two things I wanted to say to you. My ex-husband went to school with Jesse Jackson at North Carolina A&T in 1961. He went to jail with Jesse. Now, shortly after that, I met a woman that told me that Jesse really did not organize that sit-in strike. It was somebody else, and you can comment once I get off the air. The other thing is, excuse me, I met a lady in Chicago in 1971, pardon me, that told us at the time that Jesse Jackson, and mind you, this is after my husband went to school with him, and they were friends, that Jesse was taking money from the poor and abusing it through Operation Breadbasket. Now, I heard this 20 years ago. Once again, I didn't really process it. I didn't think it was right, because I was so naive, but I will listen to you.
Well, it's interesting you brought up the Operation Breadbasket part, because I was there as a youth at all of what became one of the biggest programs of Operation Breadbasket, besides the demonstrations on grocery stores and other people that weren't hiring blacks and weren't contracting with blacks, which all was very valid and effective. That lasted, those entry moments lasted until we've been in there one time. Now that same level of relationship has been drastically reduced. Whites now have legal justification for not doing affirmative business with blacks. Those same people who helped get those people those contracts in their younger ages had taken so much money from those corporations that they were ineffective against those corporations as the 70s got later and the 80s dawned in and Reagan came. And now the 90s and the chill is set in, that they're ineffective against those corporations now. So the Operation Breadbasket, which was a program, I looked up the history of Breadbasket. It was actually a duplication of a program that Leon Sullivan had set up effectively in Philadelphia, where Leon Sullivan had put pressure on white businesses and others to do business with blacks. So SCLC adopted the program, and of course Jesse was the star of the Operation Breadbasket, which Abernathy said had many chapters in many cities, most of which were just paper chapters. The only effective shining star of that was Jesse Jackson. Now, they had Push Expo. I remember being there and shooting one night. You see Stevie Wonder, Richard Pryor, Roberta Flack, The Temptations. 20, 30 artists a night, going to 3, 4 in the morning. It was just glorious. A whole international amphitheater full of booths, and it was just really heavy. Isaac Hayes for 4 hours. When Isaac Hayes was the biggest thing going in music, they were really big. Abernathy mentions in his book that the first year of Push Expo, the share to SCLC was 66,000. He said the second year it was twice as large. Our share was 11,000. And the third year it was the biggest it was ever, and we got nothing. So we asked Jesse to send us a report sheet on the money. He sends us a paper bag full of receipts. He says it took us so long to try to sort it out, we were unable to. He said the board felt it was important to have an inquiry into what happened with the funds of SCLC on that third year of Push Expo. So the board agrees to have an inquiry at the O'Hare Marriott. I have a picture of Jesse Jackson coming out of that meeting at the O'Hare Marriott. What is significant about it was that the funds were so messed up that SCLC suspended Jesse Jackson for 60 days without pay. Strike. 60 days with pay while they sorted out the records of the program. Now, simultaneously, the Chicago Tribune sends a reporter to interview Abernathy while he's on his way to the Marriott. The reporter says, did you know, is Operation Breadbasket a subsidiary of SCLC? He says, it absolutely is. We incorporated in this and that year. She says, but look, the Chicago SCLC incorporated itself under a group of black businesses and set up a foundation of its own. All of the money is legally theirs. It didn't say strike. It didn't say all the money is legally there. It just said they are the legally entitled organization. Abernathy then says, as he's being interviewed walking through the airport, well, Jesse would have no right to incorporate something that was already incorporated, and that would be discussed by the board. It's not up to me or anyone else. Actually, it's one of them Ben Shavis type of things. This executive director unilaterally does something as he's a part of a larger organization that has a set order and procedure and bylaws, etc. So what happens is that they hold this meeting at the Marriott. They suspend Jesse for 60 days with pay. Jesse walks out the room, refuses to accept the suspension, and he had accepted the suspension, walks out the room, and then resigns from SCLC. And in his resignation, he then goes over and forms Operation Push. Now, in Sharpton's book, he says that Jesse was suspended from SCLC without reason. Was suspended from SCLC without reason. It was jealousy. Well, in fact, it wasn't even Abernathy. It was the board. And, in fact, there was discrepancy over the money, and it was never stood in account because Jesse left and there was no accounting of it. Yes, they did illegally incorporate it, et cetera, but the bottom line is why all these years later is a white book company paying Reverend Sharpton $250,000 advance to pump up Jesse Jackson falsely in 1996.
All right, we got to take a break. 520-KJLH, number to call to speak to Steve Coakley. It's 28 minutes after 5 o'clock. We'll take your calls for Steve right after this. 26 minutes away from 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, hopefully it'll be Cliff, or he might be out there barbecuing. But somebody will be here at 6 o'clock. You're on the front page with Steve Coakley, though. 520-KJLH is the number to call to speak to Steve. And by the way, Steve will be stopping by the town hall meeting this next Saturday at Marla's Place with Dr. Juanza Kunjufu, Cheryl Broussard, and Kelvin Boston. It's an empowerment conference. Hopefully when you leave there, you figure out a way how to deal with what we have to deal with every day. 520-KJLH gets you on to speak with Steve. Jason in Los Angeles. Good morning. You're on the air with Steve Coakley.
Hotep call Nelson.
Hotep.
And the Hotep to the Front Page family, Steve Coakley.
Good morning, brother.
Good morning. I've enjoyed your show so much that I had to write my questions down on paper so that I could be more intrigued by the impressive aggregate of research that has been done in the presentation of it. You're an outstanding storyteller. My first question rises from an article that I read in the Watts Times. It labeled Jesse Jackson during the California affirmative action debates that he had with Governor Pete Wilson, which by the way I considered a very embarrassing show on behalf of black Californians, but above that, it labeled him as a camera chaser, in that he had no real issue of his own that he pushed, yet he found the issues in America and then ran around wherever the cameras were hottest. And I was wondering if this was the manifestation of what Dr. King was talking about when he said you're just trying to build a name for yourself and you will not use this organization to do so. Secondly, my question surrounds, media programming. Arising from the statements that you made about the certain ones in the media that were able to formulate American opinion based on the image that they build for themselves. I was watching a program not too long ago about drive-by shootings, and then 4 or 5 months later, there was another report. No, I'm sorry, it was on carjackings. And then 4 or 5 months later, I was the same news program reported an increase in carjackings, and I said, "My God, you popularized it." So no wonder the carjackings are on the rise. The media popularized it, and I wanted to get your thoughts on those two matters, and I'll take your answer off the air. Thank you.
Well, the question over Jesse and the media, I think one thing some people say as they plan their strategies to represent the interest of black people, that media is an intricate part of what you must have to have an effective strategy. And so they've built sometimes, they spent less time trying to get more people to support them and more time trying to get the media to project them. It's a strategic judgment. I would not want to consider someone a person who just chased the camera, but I would say that, in fact, Jesse just resigned yesterday from being the shadow senator here in D.C. because now, of course, he's moved back to Chicago. So some people play their strategy that kind of way. And sometimes their name or their involvement draws media. So there's a cooperative spirit between the two. Neither are trying to destroy the system. Nobody wants to kill the game out, mess up everybody's job, cause trouble, take over. So they all kind of have this relationship that if you can project Jesse on an issue, you can control and contain that issue by not offering any alternative projections or recognizing such in a way that it'll give the appearance that all blacks think like Jesse, or that's militant, less than Jesse. Whites have made projections about who's militant, people who aren't militant at all, who in fact are quite moderate. So we take the fact that they base their strategies on attention of media, and whereas we tied up all of Manhattan doing the Time Warner thing. We didn't call no press, didn't no press show up. There's about 500 police out there. Everybody and his mama knew that Manhattan was threatened by them couple of hundred people standing up in there in the center of it, but they didn't send no press. It was a newsworthy event, but who going to project somebody tying up the skyscrapers and blocking people in and next door to the president? Ain't nobody going to project that. That's not in the interest of keeping it all together. We're kind of known as a crew who want to, in fact, we intercepted an ADL dialogue about the Black Holocaust event we had before the Million Man March, and it said, now this crew over here, these are unrepentant anti-white activists, and they will never moderate their conversations to appease other audiences. And it was making a note between the difference between the Black Holocaust event and the Million Man March Atonement event. And so as far as your second question, I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
What was the second question?
I totally forgot what the second question was.
Oh, it was about...
Jamal, do you remember what the second question was?
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Brother Jamal.
Yeah, I think the brother's second question was about the relationship between the intelligence community and the media. I think he wanted to be somewhat more specific about the who, what, where's, and whys.
Well, in fact, the intelligence community just went through a major discussion about the use of journalists, and the CIA. And in fact, interestingly enough, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the school for statesmen, came out and got actively involved in the need for journalists to be used as intelligence fronts. And in fact, they agreed that under circumstances, journalists could be used, which impedes all journalism. Those outtakes, take, for example, your local, take Jim Avila. Out there in Los Angeles. I think he's the local NBC guy. In fact, I just saw him run across NBC here. He's from Chicago. He gets an outtake of Steve Coakley talking about some things that they didn't run on television. He takes that and passes it over to the media. In fact, I remember one time he kept trying to get me to say that Harold Washington would have fired me if he had been mayor. And so I said, no, he wouldn't. If he kept the communist, if he kept the guy that they proved was a communist, Fred Fine, Commissioner of Fine Arts, if he could keep the communist, I'm sure he could keep the revolutionary. And so I wouldn't agree to it on camera. So what did he do? He did the special on Harold Washington, and he says, and then he turns my voice off, and he says, and Coakley said Harold Washington would have fired him if he had been alive, and he knows that. But you don't hear me saying that. You don't know that I didn't say it. You only hear him say what I said. And so it's that type of, that we need it to be said that Coakley is illegitimate and Harold would not have legitimized him. Shit, Harold, I used to go with my mama. It was even deeper than that. But they needed to do that in the public to make black people less listen to me. I remember, in fact, with Jawanza Kunjufu, Harold Washington, and myself, we gave a lecture together at Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, and I lectured on the impact of education and the Trilateral Commission. He was Congressman Washington then, and he looked over and said, man, you come on down to my office and give me some of that trilateral information, man. I'm intrigued by that. I'm up here in Congress, and I think them boys up there, too. So he was the type of guy, and you can appreciate that. If he did not know, he would at least ask and not act like it don't exist just because he don't know of it.
All right, 18 minutes away from 6. 520 KJLH gets you on the front page. Let's go down to South Central. Astenu.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Jamal. Good morning, Carl. Good morning, Brother Steve. How you doing this morning?
Brother Astenu, I just want to thank you for the research you did on that safari company.
Yes.
Because interestingly enough, in the news recently, that safari company was granting a wish to a little dying white boy who wanted to go kill a bear before he died.
Right.
And they put great pressure not to allow this boy to take a life to enjoy the end of his life. He ended up not catching a bear, but you exposed that safari, was that the Safari International Company?
Right, that was advocating
informants in the public school system in Los Angeles.
Right, about the gun.
Right.
Yeah, my question is about a couple of other things in terms of this whole media issue. One of these movies that's out right now that's very deprecating to the black community is this Nutty Professor.
Oh, man, is it bad.
You know, besides just the caricatures of black family life, there's these really disgusting scenes of the black family with the father passing gas at the dinner table, with the a theme that has been running through a lot of these movies is to take the elder, particularly the elder woman, the black grandmother, and make her a very vulgar, obnoxious person, totally degrading, you know, one of the biggest icons in the black family, the black grandmother. But one of the things I found really interesting is Eddie Murphy's character, Buddy Love, when he transforms, one of the things that they keep talking about is this testosterone level and this increased aggressiveness based upon this testosterone level, which feeds into this whole idea of the violence initiative about black males being genetically predisposed to violence. And I think this movie kind of reinforces that whole idea.
Man, that movie is dangerous. Unfortunately, I took my young child to the movie, and it really was just one big fart. That's really, I said, what was the plot? I said, farting. That's really about what it was. And you know, I know Eddie Murphy been on the rack with white people because I know they didn't like Distinguished Gentlemen, which was subtly intriguing. And I know he got on Arsenio Hall show and repudiate politics. I know he've at different times sent his brother out to get some tapes and stuff. I know some of the things that they know. But when you look at the reviews of the movie, how whites will say, oh, Eddie Murphy's back. This is the funniest movie ever. And it's really a ridicule and put down of the black family. And I left there and I said, you know, I turned to my sister. I said, you know, sister, the worst part about this is that white people who watch this in all white areas, who are supporting the movie tremendously, will sit up and look at that and say, man, look at what go on when the black people eat.
Exactly.
And to see the dehumanizations of the characters it really hurt me. And the fact that what really hurt me worse, Brother Astenu, is that the people was laughing like crazy.
Yeah, and
you know that really hurt.
Most of the humor was very self-deprecating, particularly that scene between Eddie and the comedian. Most of it was about facial features and things of that sort.
And their mama.
Exactly.
Just really, like you said, the attack on the grandmother, the queen mother of our family. Exactly. And the, oh man, it just, even down to the little son, to make him just a little fart, you know, nothing intelligent, no dialogue.
Exactly.
He really had no dialogue in the whole movie but the fart.
Right.
And to move his lips and the sound of a fart.
Tell me this, are you familiar with this book, Eyes to My Soul, written by Tyrone Powers, this so-called ex-black FBI agent.
Brother, I just mentioned earlier that I'm reading the book. I have a tape of his. I'm going to show some of this tape when I get out there next Saturday. A tape that he did lecture in New York. And they had some brothers stand up and ask him some critical questions, including things like, will you tell us about some informants you had, this and that, and things he did not do. And I'm always like this: if you defect against them, then you tell us something that only they would know and that we need to know, and come here with some breakthrough information. Well, if you really look at the book, it's a long, drawn-out personal edification of himself and his family. And I really didn't like it. I looked at his lecture. I really didn't like it. And the worst part about it, and I've got to do this, I'm doing it now in the form of a letter to Tony Martin, because our brother Tony Martin, who I love so much, is our premier authority on Marcus Garvey, is the one that published his book. And I'm very sensitive about who is promoting him around the country and why haven't they put him to the test. And some of these same people that carry this man who spent 9 years of his life with the FBI, how could somebody have an FBI guy at their meeting but they can't have Coakley? How can somebody stand up and want to pump an FBI guy around the country but say stay away from Steve Coakley? Now, as I watch most of the people who do not want me, from the people who hosted him in New York to the people who trying to put him on in L.A., don't like Steve Coakley. But they take a FBI guy, been with the dog enemy all his life, setting up, talking about he was intrigued. His brothers told him about COINTELPRO. He was intrigued. He wanted to get in it to see. I don't have to go to hell to know it's hot. I don't have to be a prostitute to know what it's like to be a whore. So we don't have to be in the FBI to know how bad it is. So now he comes out with a book with minimal revelations. He talked a little bit about Coleman Young in Detroit, a little bit about this. He's out talking about the church bombings now. And one of the things I don't like he's doing is he's out talking against Minister Farrakhan. Now, some people look at me and say, well, you talk about him. Well, I've had experiences with him. We have set bounds and agreed to how we should criticize each other. Never against a white would I speak against him. Never in front of a white would I speak against him. And never would I allow a white to speak against him. But here come this Negro up out the FBI for 9 years, sitting up on this tape talking about how Farrakhan ain't done nothing. If he just cleans up the men who go around and change their lifestyle, that's more than most. And so to have him come out to be a product, I will not allow anyone to promote someone who has he ain't gave nothing to the black community. In fact, gave it hell. Gonna come out here and speak against the minister or anybody else black that at least has been out here. I wouldn't let him speak against Jesse Jackson. Now that's because the principle is that even though Jesse may be bad, some days he does do some right things. And I want to tell somebody, when we be speaking on something we don't like or try to stop a bad characteristic of a good person, it's not that we want to kill them off, else we woulda. It's not that we want to destroy them, we coulda. It's just that we want the right things to go forth and leave the bad things off, and we will wrestle with each other about that. That's healthy. We will not allow no FBI guy to come out here and speak against anybody in the community. That's just off limits. And I looked at this tape. I'm going to show you all some of this tape. But you can see New York didn't fall for it. They stayed deep in his butt and asked him for revelations, and he couldn't give any but some mild ones, and those mild ones were too weak.
All right, brother. Hotep, I'll see you when you get out here.
I love you, brother.
All right, Hotep.
Thank you, Stanley. Thanks for your call. 10 minutes away from 6. 520-KJLH gets you on with Steve Coakley. We'll take your phone calls right after this.
My kids are all growing up so fast. We needed more space, but who can afford houses these days? Then we heard about the FHA.
The FHA can help you become a homeowner.
8 minutes away from 6 o'clock, 520-KJLH. Steve Coakley, our guest. Steve's going to be the town hall meeting as well. Let's go out to our callers. 520-KJLH gets you on with Steve Coakley. Falasha, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Carl. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
Really appreciate you, my brother.
Thank you.
Steve, could you let black people know about partisan party politics? Because we seem to be locked in this Democratic barrel where we can't seem to understand that the Democrats will do unto black people just as the Republicans. Let me know your opinion of the coming election and if Clinton is going to be reelected, and also about the Olympics in Atlanta, all this heavy security that's out there, and how it's going to affect black people after the Olympics is gone. And do you have any information on Clinton's father or stepfather being in the Ku Klux Klan? And I suspect that Clinton is the Jim Jones of politics, and he's going to lead black people to a lot of destruction. I suspect he's involved in these church burnings, and if he's not, he's cooperating in the cover-ups. And I'll see you when you get out here, my brother.
I appreciate you, brother. Them, of course, were a lot of questions. As far as Clinton's father being in the Klan, I'm unaware of that. I will be talking about a book out now by Roger Morris saying that Clinton was worked for the CIA when he was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and that his trip to Moscow, which was lavishly financed by a poor boy from Arkansas, and other inner connections will verify that. And we're going to look at that, even a little bit about the Rhodes Scholars while I'm out there. As far as some of the other questions you raised, I think that the politics, there's a cover, and I just had to tell you this. I see this, and I'll tell you what I saw. When I get out there, some of the lectures that I've done since I've seen L.A. last, you'll want to get some of these regular Tuesday lectures I've been given here in Washington. And one night, I showed the cover of the Final Call that talked about the Black Political Convention. It's got Farrakhan on the cover. And I want you to look down in the bottom corner, right-hand corner, at the signs. They got two sets of people holding the sign. One sign says, Republicans, we're not for you, something like that. And the other sign says, Democrats, what have you done for us lately? So I turned to the audience in D.C. I said, look at this. Is it neutral or is it leaning? And everybody looked at it, and they didn't quite see it. I said, well, I predict that this is leaning. It says Republicans, no, and Democrats, maybe. Now, the Jewish paper called The Forward came out last week, had a front page story on it. They went to Farrakhan just registered to vote in Chicago, and they've registered thousands of deputy registrars. Jesse Jackson went back into Chicago, and one of the things Jesse Jackson does for the Democratic National Committee is every election year gets between $1 and $2 million to increase voters' registration. This voters' registration money is really nonpartisan money because allegedly voters' registration is a nonpartisan activity, but it's going to be financed by the Democratic National Committee. So what are we saying? We're saying that we have a situation where blacks who may begin to participate in politics will, though not claiming any affiliation, will in fact affiliate with the money to increase participation, which in fact will be an affiliation in fact, if that makes any sense. So the Jewish community went and asked the head of the Democratic National Committee and the voters registration head would they repudiate a relationship with Farrakhan, and they said no. They said we will not rule out working with the Nation of Islam in voters registration and other activity. So they got the Republican guys say absolutely we wouldn't do it. They got the Democrat people to say we might do it. And so there it rests the possibility of what may come out of the Black Political Convention. Now, I work for the people. I tell you what I see. I forecast this. I'm not to allege this. I forecast this based upon those indicators that I just shared with you. And again, I know we're getting time, want to reemphasize for the people that I'll be there Saturday, July 13th at 2700 West 54th Street, which is the 54th and 5th Avenue, there at the Amin-Ra church there, headed by our Father in Christ, Brother Onion Palmer. We'll be back there Sunday morning at 1 p.m. There's plenty room. Usually when I'm there, I know you all get upset with me because we're in small locations, but I'll only be giving these 3 lectures. I won't be anyplace else, and it's large enough to get 200-300 people in, so we have enough room. So feel free to come out. It's only a small donation to get in, and I really would appreciate your support. Saturday the 13th, Sunday the 14th at 1 p.m., and Wednesday the 17th at 7 p.m.
All right, 3 minutes away from 6, 520 KJLH. So Wayman, good morning. You're on with Steve Coakley.
Good morning, Carl. Good morning, Steve Coakley.
Good morning, brother.
Quick thing on the Nutty Profession and these other black shows. I had a chance to see some pilots with some white people, and I had never sat down and watched comedy, black comedy with white people, and you have a whole different perspective. So, I think we have to project when we're talking about images, not what the white people would think about our black shows, but, what the black people would get out of our black shows. But with Jesse Jackson, I talked to Jesse Jackson a couple of weeks ago on this show, and I have, it's time for his ideas to go. But I think by stigmatizing, we would lose by trying to stigmatize this man with his character, because there are too many things about his character that are positive, that if you put them on the scales, that the positive would far outweigh the little petty negatives that we could bring against a man's character. Because I saw that PBS special, and if you look at the positive things that he's done for black people, they far outweigh the, cameras chasing and all those other claims. The man ran for president. He's responsible for Ron Brown and many other things. But could you research in the future on Jesse his relationship with the feminists and relationship with the homosexual community? Because I think those things and the things he's advocating in government are far more dangerous to us, and I think we could make a better argument that would change Jesse's mind if we could attack those people that he's coalescing with rather than his character.
In fact, Wayman, just to piggyback on what you're saying before you get off, you mentioned the feminists. You need to know that Jesse Jackson used to be anti-abortion, which is a very valid position for a religious man not to want to kill life in the womb or without. And you're against abortion, right?
Right.
Well, Bella Abzug had a private meeting with Jesse Jackson in New York. Money was put on the table. This is 1971. Jesse was an avowed preacher in the spirit of Martin King against abortion. After that meeting with Bella Abzug, he came out and announced that he had become pro-abortion and became one of his primary advocates in the black community. And that came out of his relationship and his desire to run with Bella Abzug and white feminists who at that time were in the process of neutralizing the same affirmative action that he alleges he spent all his time standing up for. Affirmative action got neutralized with the inclusion of the disabled, the handicapped, and the gay. And that neutralization was brought about by the same people who he would allege he would want to support, which would primarily be us. So I can agree that everybody has some value. I also know that we measure a man's failings by the damage that they've done. And in hindsight, as we get near the last days of our great brother Kwame Ture, who I'd love to see on the show sometime soon, who's in New York working on his memoirs, who's an outstanding piece of work about to come out. And this brother is, he's in a health emergency, and we need to give him all of our prayers. But the impact, to think that Kwame's still here and Kwame stood next to Martin King, I really would like to know what it would have been like if Martin and Malcolm and even Ron Brown and those others who met short deaths were still here and had the right to live. How come none of these white devils never have any of these short deaths that all of the great blacks have? So I would like to have seen the impact. So I will measure him by the impact he has caused, having been in Chicago, having worked with him personally, having known his relationship with the intelligence community, how many people who may have been spotted out, who were new Malcolm X's, who may have got boxed in and put down by the intelligence community because Jesse felt them threatening to the status quo and fingered them, and they were destroyed. We need to take an account of that.
All right, 2 minutes after 6, KJLH, Compton, Los Angeles. We've just run out of time. Dre's coming in for Cliff. Steve Coakley, where are you going to be next weekend? I know you're going to stop by the town hall meeting, right?
Probably probably next Friday. I'm probably going to see Isla Von Zan out in Long Beach, and then Saturday morning, I know I'm going to be there with my brother Nasruddin Muhammad at 7 a.m. at the Run out there in Inglewood, and I'm going to the forum with you there at the educational forum to help the churches, and then I'm going to lecture that night at 5 o'clock o'clock for the Amen Ra Church, and we all need to thank them for sponsoring the brother. Amen Ra Church, 2700 West 54th Street, 54th and 5th Avenue, Saturday at 5 o'clock. We'll then go Sunday at 1 o'clock, and then Wednesday at 7 o'clock. And again, it's just a small $5 donation. There's plenty room for people. We'll be real tight, 2 hours. So you want to be there and you want to be on time. And I really...
Oh, wow. It seems like we lost Steve. 3 minutes after 6. 520-KJLH. Keep that number handy. Here's the question, Jamal's question of the day. Let me see. Where is the question? Name the African-American icon who was both an early Boule member and founding member of the NAACP, who died in Ghana after putting himself in exile from the United States. 520-KJLH is the number to call if you know the person. Steve, are you still there?
Yeah. Okay, what happened at the end? I got cut off?
You got cut off, you know.
We still on the air?
We're still on. We're
okay,
back
that's Saturday, 2700 West 54th Street at 5 o'clock p.m., Sunday, 1 o'clock p.m., 2700 West 54th Street, and Wednesday, now this is, of course, Saturday the 13th, Sunday the 14th, and Wednesday the 17th at 7 o'clock p.m. I'll be there in L.A., and I got some brand new information I really look forward to sharing.
Okay, and of course, you'll be all over the place. If you want to know where he is, give us a call here at the station. I'm going to put you on hold because Jamal wants to speak to you.
Okay.
4 minutes after 6. Thank you, Steve Coakley. The question one more time. Name the African-American icon who was both an early Boule member, also a founding member of the NAACP. He died in Ghana after putting himself in exile from the United States. We've got 2 books to give away, both from Valerie Shaw, her book Impressions, How to Pamper the Black Male. 520-KJLH if you know the answer to that. Want to remind you the comments expressed on the front page and